The dust rose high over the main street of Dry Creek that morning, curling into the sky like smoke from a dying fire. The air was hot, dry, and restless, carrying the smell of horse sweat and old timber. Folks had gathered early, their boots scraping in the dirt, their voices low, tense, almost eager. In the middle of the street, an old freight wagon stood still, its paint chipped, its wheels dry and groaning in the heat. But the wagon wasn't the reason everyone was there. It was the girl tied to it. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, her dress torn at the hem, and a streak of dried blood traced her cheek. Her hair, normally pinned neatly, had come loose in the morning wind, falling across her face. Her name was Clara Weston, the blacksmith's daughter, though that title meant little to the men who had dragged her here. Her eyes, bright and defiant even under the harsh sun, scanned the crowd. Not for mercy, not for help, just to remember every face that had chosen to watch. Thief, a man spat from the front row, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Another called her liar. They said she had stolen from the town's treasury, money meant to fix the well. She swore it wasn't true. But no one cared. In this town, once a rumor took root, it grew faster than weeds after a storm. The sheriff leaned against a hitching post, chewing on a matchstick, his eyes cold and uninterested. By order of the council, he drawled, she'll stand here, till sundown. Let folks see what happens to thieves. The words slid from his mouth like they were routine, as if this wasn't a young woman's life and dignity he was talking about, but just another day's work. From the far edge of town, a lone rider approached. The heat shimmered around him, making him seem at first like a mirage, a shadow on horseback. But as he drew closer, his figure became clear, broad shoulders, a dust-worn hat pulled low, and eyes like steel under the brim. Jonas Hale had been gone for weeks, driving cattle across the range. He'd left Dry Creek to the quiet, thinking nothing could go wrong in such a small, stubborn town. But what he saw now made his blood run hot. He stopped his horse in the dust, boots planted firmly in the stirrups, staring at Clara. He saw the rope biting into her wrists, the humiliation in her posture, and the cruel satisfaction on the faces of the townsfolk. Jonas had known her since they were children. He had once pulled her from the river when she'd fallen through the ice in winter. She had always been brave, always honest. The idea of her stealing was laughable, but no one here was laughing for the right reasons. Who did this? His voice was deep, carrying across the street like the rumble of distant thunder. The sheriff barely looked up. Town's business, he replied. Keep ridin', Hale. Jonas swung down from his saddle, his boots thudding into the dust. He walked with measured steps, each one heavy with purpose. Cut her loose. A few men in the crowd laughed, short, sharp bursts of mockery. Or what? One of them sneered, spitting into the dirt. Jonas stopped just a few feet from Clara, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's. Or you'll wish you had. The laughter faded into an uneasy silence. There was a stillness in the air now, like the seconds before a storm breaks. Jonas's hands weren't on his gun, but everyone knew how fast they could be if they needed to. You planning to stand against the whole town? The sheriff asked, shifting his weight and letting his hand rest on his revolver. Jonas's voice was calm, but it carried weight. If the whole town's wrong, yes. The crowd murmured. Some shifted their boots in the dust. Others looked away, suddenly uncomfortable under Jonas's gaze. He stepped forward, close enough now to smell the stale tobacco on the sheriff's breath. Without breaking eye contact, Jonas walked past him, the crowd reluctantly parting. He reached into his pocket, pulled his hunting knife, and with a swift motion, sliced the rope from Clara's wrists. The fibers snapped, and her hands dropped to her sides. She didn't flinch. Her eyes found his, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, defiance, and an unbroken bond that years and distance hadn't dimmed. Get her outta here, someone shouted from the back. Jonas turned slowly, stepping between Clara and the mob. His stance was wide, shoulders squared, and his shadow fell long over the dirt. No one lays a hand on her. The sheriff took a step forward, his fingers brushing the grip of his gun. But Jonas's right hand hovered just above his own holster, his fingers loose but ready, the way a rattlesnake coils before striking. You gonna shoot me for doing what's right? Jonas asked, his voice low enough that only the first row could hear, but loud enough that the message carried through the silence. The sheriff's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the crowd, but no one stepped forward to help him. They weren't laughing anymore. Finally, the sheriff spat in the dust. Take her. But don't bring her back. Jonas nodded once, turned to Clara, and helped her mount his horse. His hands were steady as he adjusted the reins, then swung up behind her. Without another word, he turned the horse and rode toward the open plains. The dust kicked up behind them, curling into the air like a final insult to the town they left behind. They rode in silence for miles, the sun dropping low in gold across the prairie. Clara's hands still trembled from the ropes, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "They'll come after us." Jonas shook his head. "Not today. Not ever, if they know what's good for them." Days later, the truth came out. The missing money had never been in Clara's hands, it had been taken by the mayor himself, hidden away to pay off gambling debts in a neighboring town. The council hushed it up, ashamed, but the damage was done. By then, Jonas and Clara were long gone, following the trail west where the land rolled wide and the sky seemed endless. The wind carried the scent of sage and freedom, and the horizon promised a place where judgment couldn't follow. Some folks in Dry Creek still whispered about that day, about the rancher who stood alone against a whole town, and the girl whose spirit they couldn't break. Others stayed silent, their shame too heavy to carry in words. But Clara never forgot. Not the heat of the sun on her face as they tied her up, not the faces that turned away, and not the moment the ropes fell away at Jonas's hand. She carried it like a badge, not for the humiliation they tried to give her, but for the proof that when the world turns cruel, there are still those who will stand and fight. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the ending.